There we are. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network. Today, I am here with Joa, and we're going to fix work.
We're
This
going to fix
is
work.
so exciting. Okay. So, y'all, if you've missed the previous episode, you'll want to go back and catch our introduction. Today's episode is specifically focused on small micro businesses,
Mhm.
solopreneurs, people who are doing it small. Because whether you realize it or not, most of us internalize productivity culture and we bring those things into our own businesses. And so that's what we're going to fix today. I'm so excited. Joa, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited as well. This is such a good series, and I feel like our first episode last week, we went pretty big, pretty quick, and I love that we're bringing him back down to the individual level. And what better way to do that than the individual who's like trying to grow their own thing from this one man band, one woman band into a whole system of itself, right? We are a system in of ourselves, and then we can grow more beyond that, but we have to make sure that we're not inadvertently replicating all of these patterns that we absorb from our larger work culture.
And how does that show up?
Yeah, well, we move through our culture experience wherever we're rooted, and I grew up in the United States. Most of my work history is in the United States, so American work culture is sort of the culture that I am imbued with, and a lot of that looks like very task oriented, very goal oriented, very accomplish oriented, not so much process oriented, not so much sustainability oriented, not so much of, where are you as a person. And I will have a caveat that a lot of my work history was in psychology and social work. So there is quite a bit of talk about self care. We could do a whole episode about that, Briar,
Mm-hmm.
the self care industry. Um, and what that means in terms of work and who we are in the workplace. But when we talk about the cultural messages that we get, we are absorbing cultural messages all the time, largely in an unconscious sort of way. And so when we are sort of ground down by the system, by trying to be in these work systems to the point where we eventually hit a point and we say, I don't want to be in this work system anymore. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to be a freelancer. I'm going to do my side gig full time, right? Whatever it is, that moment of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to do it differently. Almost always that is catalyzed by this moment of wanting to do things differently. And that's where the trap comes in, because sometimes when we've absorbed all of these messages unconsciously and subconsciously, no matter how badly we are ground down and think we're going to do something differently, we strike out on our own and we start doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, it's really interesting the ways in which these patterns repeat themselves, especially unconsciously. And it really takes a lot of work to unpack them.
Mm.
How do we determine when a practice is causing us harm?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that we touched on this last time a bit about doing that inner inventory and building in reflective practice to just do that internal kind of self-assessment. Like, how are you doing today, self? How are you doing this week, self? How are you doing this quarter, self? To kind of check and note milestones, in positive directions and negative directions. Are we more tired than usual? Are we more engaged than usual? There's all kinds of metrics that we can look at, but usually we start to think about something not not going well when we start to feel adverse effects. And that can look a lot of
And
different
it's
ways.
already not too late, but by the time we're feeling adverse effects, the problem has usually picked up steam, right?
Right, right. And it's not too late to fix, but it is too late to be proactive at that point.
Right.
I think that's an important distinction, right? We can preempt a lot of these things before we have adverse effects. We can't preempt them once we're feeling adverse effects, but we can course correct. We can make adjustments at any point. There's never really a point where we've gone too far and there's no getting back again. At least that's my perspective. I suppose some people might feel differently.
I think the question becomes then, what are we looking for? What are we looking for in terms of toxicity that this is tough, right? Because I don't know what I don't know. And I don't know that I have internalized bad systems if I'm not constantly reviewing for what those systems are. And I
Mhm.
feel like in my own business, this has been a very intuitive, reflective process that
Mm.
I'll find these things because I've sat with them long enough to go, why do I not like this thing? What do I do about it?
Mhm.
I tend to think that because I am autistic, I'm really good at that level of self examination.
Mm. Mhm.
And most people don't spend that much time navel gazing.
Mm.
So, how do we assess when there is a problem
Mm.
before it becomes a crisis?
Yeah. Well, in preparation for this episode of ours today, I was looking at some of the cultural norms in the US for work related um, details as compared to a lot of other places.
Mhm.
And I thought it'd be fun to go down the list and sort of assess these pieces from both like the individual level and then like the structural level. Because I think that you don't know what you don't know, exactly like you said. So how do you get that? Well, you can start from a listicle, work your way backwards.
You
Um,
can
you know,
always ask Chat GPT.
you can ask ChatGPT, you can do like scholarly peer-reviewed research. Like there's any number of ways, aside from, just like being able to do that inner inventory, right? Of, how are things going truly, and how do I gauge this based on how things have been versus what I would like them to be. But one of the sort of like mantras of professional life, I feel like, is work life balance, right? This idea that we're supposed to balance work hours with non work hours, and that, and then sleep hours, right? Like if you just have the right formula and the right ratio, everything's going to be fine.
888.
888, right? 8 work, 8 personal, 8 sleep. Everything's going to be beautiful. You're going
Right.
to live happily ever after. Which of course is, first of all, that ratio is true for like, I don't know,
Yeah,
0.001% of all
nobody.
people
Come
ever.
on. I
Yeah,
can't.
and maybe that 0.001% is super happy, but maybe not. I don't know. I haven't found anyone who actually has that exact formula yet. Have you?
Nope. No one.
No, no. And then, but I think that the idea of balance is still an important one. It might not mean 888, but we all do need to sleep to some degree. We all do need personal things that sort of like feed our soul. We all do need to earn an income to like support our lives. We all have these needs in different constellations for different people, right? And that looks a lot of different ways. Somebody who has no family life may have like way more hours that they genuinely want to devote to work. But also, someone with no family life might also really not want to devote those hours to work because they love world travel, and they will use all of those extra hours in the day to like plan and enact all of their travel plans, right? It's there's no assumptions that we can make just based on family constellation, for example. So we run into problems there, making
Right.
assumptions when you're looking at it from the employer perspective.
Okay. So let's hit your myths.
Let's what?
Let's let's go down your list of beliefs here.
Yeah, yeah. So belief number one, Americans work crazy long hours, right? And that is backed up by data. That is backed up by data.
And
Americans
the
work.
more educated you are, the more hours you work. This
Mm,
one has been, I read an article from Ann Helen Peterson about this fairly recently,
mhm,
that there's more bleed
mm,
because you spent all this time getting these degrees. And so
mhm,
now you are part of the elite,
mhm,
and it's harder to say no. It's harder
mm,
to not check your email after
mm.
work hours. It's harder to not be available. I mean, when your billables are at 12-minute increments, you can get 12 minutes in anywhere.
There's a really interesting like a tangent on that, which I would be interested in investigating further um, at some point, which is this idea that like of micromanaging
Hmm.
and how leadership is constructed in US based teams versus other places. I think by and large, a lot of the research alludes to the fact that US based teams are a lot more micromanagey. The
Hmm.
supervisors, managers are all much more intricately involved in the day to day of their teams than a lot of other places. Um, and so that really supports what you're saying, though, which is even as you ascend in leadership, presumably often with education as well, like you don't really have less demands on your time, you have more.
You have more.
But that may be a US based phenomenon as well.
I'm 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 willing to bet that it is, at least in or North American. I think that
Right.
there are similar cultural norms in Canada, but
Mhm.
once you go out of North America, people do not view work the way that we view work.
No, no. Yeah. So the data that backs up the long work hours for the United States shows sometimes a disparity of double. Like Americans are working double the number of hours of some, for example, European countries. So excuse me. Which is just like that blows my mind. Blows my mind when you think about that. It's not across the board. Those are the extremes, but like it's at least 50% more oftentimes in terms of hours in the day
Hmm.
or hours in the work week rather. So there's one to examine. And when we think about that, let's talk about what that looks like when we become a team of one or the leader of a very, very small team, right? I think especially, I mean, I'll speak from my personal experience. When I decided to do my own business, I was like, I can do this better. I'm going to do great things. I was so excited and enlivened by it. And I wanted to do it all the time. And I couldn't not do it. I didn't set
Hmm.
boundaries for myself on it. I just was like, let's do it. It's so exciting. I worked crazy long hours. I would work weekends. I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about it. Part of that was just the creative process, right? And I don't feel any like negative feelings about that, but it's certainly like from an outsider looking in, was that a good work-life balance? It really wasn't. It really wasn't. I was so immersed in it. But
The the culture of always being on as an entrepreneur
mhm,
and hustling,
mhm.
man, that's a real thing.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. So even though like I felt like it was very inner driven with like my creativity just wanting to really come out and form this ball of clay, right? Into my vision, it's also definitely reinforced, right? As soon as I had a single like search logged on the computer of like how to start a small business, right? Like you start getting the targeted ads for all the things which are about hustle culture and like getting to that six figures or seven figures or 22 figures, like however many figures you're supposed to aim for now, right? Like, and all of that, it's just like it piles on. It piles on so quickly. But it's this weird juxtaposition too of like lie on a beach, make six figures, hustle all the time, rest 60, hours a week. I don't know.
Which is fascinating when you look at the actual numbers, because what we know is that most solopreneurs never break six figures. Most small businesses go out of business within
Mm,
3 to 5 years. These numbers are extraordinarily high. And so I really personally have a hard time understanding how people are. I think we believe that we've hit gold and
mm,
that our thing is not going to fall prey to those numbers. We're going to be different.
mhm,
But that too is a toxic byproduct of
mm,
this culture, right?
mhm, mhm. Absolutely. When you look at the reasons why most small businesses fail, a lot of it has to do with not being able to access uh, financial resources to be able to really thrive. And we talk about this all the time in the Catalyst where you and I met, right? Which is, just this whole mindset around, like, is it a scarcity mindset of like, this is the bare minimum I need to survive, to get by, to have, a business that's viable, or do I think expansively about what would it take for me to thrive, right? That's what Marisa talks about with the profit plan, and how do we build out a vision that will actually allow us that room, like, don't come at it from bare minimums, come at it from expansion. Um but yeah, I think that getting back to the point of like the long work hours, right? When we are an employee and we're being implicitly or explicitly asked for these long, long work hours, part of the reason why it doesn't feel good to do that oftentimes is because we're not seeing uh, the full trajectory of what those long work hours yield, right? Getting back to your stakeholder,
Right.
shareholder idea. But then when it's our own, it feels differently to put in those work hours because we are seeing the full trajectory. It really is all for us. If we want to work 12 hours, those 12 hours are going towards our bottom line. They're going towards our business vision. So those long hours get cast in a different light. That's one distinction. But at the same time, I've found it useful to sometimes reflect on my work patterns as a solopreneur and say, if I were being asked to do this by someone else, would this feel like an okay ask? Just because I'm asking myself to do it doesn't mean that I shouldn't have some sort of evaluation metric like that.
Right. And we are the worst bosses, right?
Mhm.
Because again, we've internalized all of this. Okay, what's next?
What's next? Um, Very, very similar, though, like one step out is never going on vacation. Time off, like literal actual time off, not just like reasonable work hours, but time away from work.
In a
And
business
this
of
this
one.
goes to vacation time and sick time and
Hmm.
parental leave and
Hmm.
and,
Hmm.
right? Literally anything that's categorized as being out of the office, all of that.
And in a business of one, you are always the bottleneck. So if you can't replace yourself, then you have to create structurally things in your business that allow you to make enough to cover these times, or that you can cover income in ways that don't require you to be physically present, but you have to have an idea of what that looks like. So, for example, I take all of October off. It's um, the month my son died. It's important for me to be able to set aside that month and be with my family and my grief. This year, I will likely just rerun greatest hits. I will have a couple of people covering lives on the network to keep stuff new. Next year, I fully intend to have stepped out of this seat entirely. And so the network will run as intended because I will have given it to other people to do that in the month of October. Whatever it is for you, you got to be able to build these things in structurally.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And part of the task of being an entrepreneur is to envision what you'll need down the road beyond the context of the here and now. Because if you don't set the pattern now before it's needed, good luck setting the pattern once something else is already established.
And what do you do when shit hits the fan and you have no backup plan and you are your only source of income?
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Right. And that really is the task at hand. And I had that experience, within the past 2 months when my dad got very sick and passed, and I had to be literally out of the office entirely for 2 weeks straight. First ever refund of a client because I knew they had just signed up for a service. I knew there was no way I was going to be delivering on it.
Hmm.
Like all of the steps that I needed to take in that moment. Luckily, I had thought through what it would take, and I had taken vacations, mindfully and planfully last year. So I knew ahead of time sort of what would be needed, even though I had to implement it at a moment's notice this time. But if I had just worked through last year and thought, well, it's the first year, got to grind it out, like day in, day out, not practiced in a certain sense, how to step away, it would have been much harder in that crisis situation to be able to implement those steps.
Hmm. And especially, again, United States in particular, with no paid parental leave, if you decide to have children, your business has to cover all of that time. And it can't just be after you give birth either, because you don't know what will happen in the second or third trimester and whether or not you'll be able to work at the speed you were able to work before.
Mhm.
So these things structurally, I mean, Jesus, no wonder the younger generations are not having kids. But if this is not built in, then it will
Mhm.
never be sustainable.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, like, I think having kids is like one season of life that, you know, a certain portion of people sort of think about as an automatic thing. But you're right, fewer and fewer people, in a certain sense, are really enacting that vision for their lives. But just in terms of like age, right? Like we all get older every year. We like our abilities and our capabilities change as time moves us through. It changes our bodies, it changes our minds, it changes all of these things. Let alone the context of our lives, or changing what we would like to invest our time and energy into. My friend Guy says we're all one good fall away from disability status, right?
Oh, yes.
Then there's the whole disability element of it too. Like a lot of able-bodied people, sort of never think twice about, well, what if I wasn't an able-bodied person? What would that look like? And all of these contingencies are things that you have to be acutely aware of, as an
Disability in particular, y'all, especially again in the United States, disability insurance is means tested, which means if you make more than a certain amount of money, you don't qualify for it. And it is, for all intents and purposes, enforced poverty, because disability payments are not enough to live on.
no,
And so you can get them, or you can make enough money to support yourself. Again, build this into your business. Have a plan.
that's right. That's right. You got to plan for all the things. The next category on the list, it's actually like three different entries, but they are all about the same thing, which is how we move through like a 24-hour period. So eating lunch at your desk, Bad,
I'm
not taking
very
breaks.
occasionally guilty, although I worked
Yeah,
really hard on that one. Yes.
yeah, not taking breaks during the day and sending emails after work hours.
Mhm.
So it's sort of this idea that like we're just from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, we're available to do work related tasks and we don't really do anything other than that. If we do other things, we do them at the same time as work tasks. We eat at our work desk, and it's just like this idea that we're literally carrying the work with us like for all of the waking hours. Which again, with my experience of being an entrepreneur, like I certainly did that and it was creative and vibrant and wonderful in the early days, but it's not sustainable.
No, and it's very draining over time.
It's very draining over time, and part of my entrepreneurship journey is also understanding like the seasonality of work and of a business over time. There will be these intense periods, but there will also be these like slower periods. You have to build in these different seasons to it to make the whole rather than just trying to go at one pace all the way through. 'Cause it gets very tricky to maintain anything over time, no matter whether you set it at a breakneck pace or a snail's pace, doing the same thing day in and day out, week after week, year after year is nearly impossible.
And for small businesses in particular, especially people who are managing their own social media, there's a
Mm,
lot of bleed here into regular time because it's all on your phone. You have the ability to check Facebook, check LinkedIn, just get a quick DM sent. You know, truly, this is probably one of the biggest thieves of time when you
yeah.
are a small business owner. And I think even if you are hyper aware of it can be very easy to just lose track.
Oh, yeah, because let's not forget that social media platforms are literally designed to make you do
That's
that.
correct.
It's not an accident, it's by design.
It's by design.
It's by design. So when you do that, you're it's not because you've got a shortcoming or you're not being intentional enough, like it is designed to like have you say, "Oh, I'll just check this thing and then scroll for 2 hours."
And there are techniques that you can use that can help you get away from that. I truly recommend that everyone track their time with
Mhm.
as much closeness as you are able, because the more you track your time, the more you realize how much of it you spend on stupid shit that you would not be doing if you realized. I
Absolutely.
also recommend, especially for my neurodivergent folks, either two separate phones. I have a work phone and a home phone because my home phone has, I mean, and I work at home. So it's the upstairs phone and the downstairs phone. But the upstairs phone does not have social media on it.
Yeah.
It's also in grayscale. So there's not any need for me to actually, there's no colors, there's much less dopamine. It's
Yeah.
really much more likely that I'll pick it up, use it for what I need it for, and then put it down.
Yeah. That you're to be commended. That is excellent advice. I'm so glad to hear that you're doing it. I mentioned last time some of my clients who have the best quote unquote work-life balance are government employees
Right,
because
because they just can't.
it's strictly regulated as to whether you can or cannot be on a device doing work things, not, during work hours. And so they just don't. And that is something that, I would wish for everybody to be able to have that distinction so solidly. Because sometimes, like let's be honest, sometimes we respond better when we're told that we can't do something than if we're just left with wide open choices. Not all things, not all
Right.
things. I'm not condoning an authoritarian regime. I'm just saying that there's sometimes that, really strict boundaries like that can make a huge difference for ourselves.
And because these things have been programmed into us,
Mhm.
boundaries with ourselves are really healthy. This is the way that we create the kind of structure that we need rather than feeling like they're oppressive.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Boundaries make the world go round, and especially and we have to start with ourselves. We have to start with ourselves before we can really do them very well out in the world oftentimes. So let's start with ourselves. Let's do it. Mhm.
Okay. Do we have anything else?
There's one really interesting one on this list, which is that Americans don't socialize well with their coworkers, which I found to be a
Interesting.
fascinating thing to think about.
So, I think that when there are so many requirements about how we work, the only way to approach your colleagues is competitively.
Yep, yep. The competition piece definitely occurred to me as well because it gets catty and there
Right.
turns into this one-upmanship of like, "Oh, I'm working so hard. No, but I'm working so hard. No, but I'm working the hardest." Right? And so it's like, if you wanna compete at that level of working so hard, you can't sit around and chit chat.
Truly, it is one of the things that I admire most about Gen Z is their complete and total willingness to say, no, fuck this. I'm sorry. I'm not playing this game. This is not worth my time.
No. And it's such a point of consternation for older generations who are often in leadership positions
Mhm.
with them, this idea that they're not, like, falling in line and doing what we've always done. It's a real tension point.
And the generational gap. So people get people are still blaming millennials for most of the societal problems at large, but in fact millennials are now in many cases middle management,
Oh, yeah, we are. Oh, yeah, we
right?
are.
And Gen
We're getting to
X,
upper management.
right?
We'll be there soon.
And Gen X, the original slackers, they are now upper management because most boomers are either in government or they have retired.
Yeah.
Okay, that was perhaps a bad joke, but accurate. So when we look at enforcement of norms,
Mhm.
all of these generations have come along and said, we're going to do things differently.
Right.
And they get in, and I think there's been some slow procedural changes,
Mhm.
but it's taken all of those things for us to reach a place where Gen Z now can say completely sincerely, I'm here to do the job I was hired to do. Nothing more, nothing less.
Mhm.
Want me to do more? Pay me more. That's
Mhm.
it.
Right. We don't have to get emotional about it. This
Nope.
is just the situation.
No, I mean, and it's truly, I look at my daughter who's 21 years old, and I look at the way that she treats her job, and she's not stressed about it. This is the job. She goes to work, she does the job. When she leaves the job,
Mhm.
she's left the job.
Yeah.
I truly am finding that to be a refreshing shift in the way that we are approaching work. So, how do we bring that attitude in to a business of one or few?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, it has to start to look like those boundaries with ourselves, right? You know, the idea of putting work down, having a separate work phone, having dedicated time and, you know, to do something else. And there is this pressure, right? We have to build in, we have to build in the passive income, and we have to be ready for, you know, when we need sick leave, when we need to take a vacation, right? It's like there is that sort of real motivational drive that's, you know, financially tied, of like, we are supporting ourselves now. This is it. There's no one's coming to save us. It's just
No
us.
one's coming to save us.
Right.
Yes.
But it's also like, if no one's coming to save us and we burn out, then what? Then what? Right? Like that's the what if that you've got to look at really hard when you're like, no, no, I'm just gonna put in this like full weekend doing work with no break. Like, yeah, and then you burn out, then what?
Hmm.
Right? Take the break before you need it. Even if you're not sure what you'll do with the time, take the break before you need it.
And work it backwards, right?
Mhm.
That is implicit in, I think, so much of what this piece entails. If I have to pay for my own maternity leave and I have to pay for my own disability and I'm going to have to pay for my own retirement because that's not guaranteed to me in any way, then I need X amount.
That's right.
I need to create it in X number of ways.
Right.
And I have to remove the emotion from it,
Mm,
right?
mm. Say more about that.
I think that a great deal of the things that you've mentioned are an implicit culture of expectation and guilt.
Mm,
That we do those things because if we don't, we're not a team player.
mm,
We're not a member of the family.
mm,
We are ostracized from work culture.
mm, mhm,
And so that's how we get those things to stick.
mm,
It's built around guilt, obligation, shame,
mhm,
and toxicity
mhm,
that we then bring to ourselves as I'm not good enough.
mhm,
I will never be able to do this.
mhm,
I am not worthy of
mm, mhm,
having these things.
mhm. Yeah. So we internalize that and it turns into isolation,
Hmm.
really profound isolation. And then when you layer on that competitiveness that keeps us from being able to just connect human to human with colleagues oftentimes. Yeah.
And when you are a solo,
Mhm.
truly, like the thing that has accelerated my growth is
Mhm.
finding communities.
That's right.
Every single time. Whether it's a few close local business besties that I can
Mhm.
go out and have lunch with and we talk about our businesses and we just brainstorm, even though we may or may not do anything like what the other person does.
That's right.
It's for me the catalyst, for you the
Right.
catalyst, right?
Right.
That I've built this community for myself where I can show up and be seen.
That's right.
But there is no competition in those places.
That's right. That's right. It's in some ways it's a really nice way to like train that out of our sort of reflexive way that we interact around work oftentimes, is to just really be in those spaces with people who, I mean, I'm not sure if you're in the space with any direct competitors. I am, but
Mhm.
we're not competitive with each other. We're collaborative with each other. And that has been a real joy. And I'll say also that community building cannot be underrated in the least. I mean, it is one of the most pivotal parts of how we operate as human beings, right? we are sort of wired to be relational, and community building is the thing that gets us through a lot of hard times. And outside of the Catalyst, I also have a group of entrepreneurs who meet on a twice a month basis, and we're not in each other's spaces in terms of our businesses, but we have been meeting twice a month for 2 years now. I mean, like,
Hmm.
there's nobody who knows me better, in a business way than these women do. And it's literally changed my capacity as a business owner
Now,
just to be in that space, in
just out
that
of
community.
curiosity, is this group paid?
No.
See? And truly, for me, like, the catalyst is different because it is a coaching environment. I
Mhm.
pay for that because I value the entire experience of it. But in terms of community, some of the best ones that I have worked with have been built on mutual affection and admiration for each other,
That's right.
not paying to be in somebody's energy.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's yeah, you're right. They both have value, but there's something that is truly remarkable about just organically formed community groups.
Hmm.
Yep.
And if you do not have one, I encourage you to go out and make one. And it is as simple as uh, the last mastermind group that I was in, I created, and it was very much, hey, ladies, I love what you're doing. Let's get together every week and talk about our businesses.
Right.
And we were together for about 18 months before schedules fell out and things just. However, even though we no longer meet on a regular basis, those women are some of my biggest fans, right? They share my stuff, they're constantly doing things with me and for my business. These groups may not be permanent, but you just build them by saying, hey, you, I like the cut of your jib. Let's hang out for a while and share notes.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, admiration takes you far.
It really does.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think there's one tiny add-on from that list that I'll just mention because it's kind of related to this too. One of the call outs was that Americans by and large don't really take pride in what they do or work.
Ooh, I really want
And
to unpack that.
it's a compelling, sort of juicy little thing to end on. We're practically at the end for today, but I was thinking about that really hard as it relates to solopreneurship,
Hmm.
because there's this whole emphasis of you have to be the face of your business, you have to be so proud of it, you have to be putting it on social media all the time. But a lot of people start their businesses as a side hustle that they can't really publicly come out and scream from the rooftops because of a lot of reasons.
Hmm.
And some people want to do their business and they don't want to be the face of it. They don't want to be having to scream from the rooftops about it, right? There's so many facets of it that are really interesting to me, in the context of team of one, or head of a small team.
I also, there's a lot of emphasis on starting with why and
Mm,
doing what you love. And that if you do what you love, the money will follow,
mm,
which has led many people, myself included. I'm very guilty of attempting to monetize my hobbies,
mhm,
which is terrible. And then you put all of that in a bowl,
mhm.
toss in imposter syndrome, and you're left with a bunch of people who aren't sure if they love what they do, but do feel really guilty that they don't love it as much as everybody says they should.
Yep. Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and Don't feel too guilty about having tried to monetize your hobbies, by the way, because I think that that was explicit advice for like 15 years
Right.
on all channels.
Right. I think we really lose sight of the idea that it's okay to make money
Mhm.
separate from our passions.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. 100%.
And this is especially true for people with jobs, but I also know people with businesses who don't love their business. I don't think people go, well, not everyone goes into real estate because they like houses. They go into real estate because they have really great commissions.
Right. Right.
So it's okay if you don't love it, but we truly there is an expectation in the entrepreneurial world that you're doing it because you love it.
Mhm. Yes, that's true. Let's bring it back to our fix work. Like, what are our bottom lines for fixing work as it pertains to our micro businesses?
It looks like finding the culture and forcibly removing it from your business.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Setting boundaries with ourselves. Practicing setting boundaries with ourselves, not arbitrary ones, but ones that pertain to exactly what you just said.
And once we set them with ourselves, it becomes much easier to set them with clients.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I have talked about this before, but I'm not a quick start. I do not work well on a short deadline.
Mhm.
And I have built a lot of margin into particularly my service offerings because we are not about that productivity culture here. And part of working with me is that we release some of the expectations around when
Mm.
things happen.
Mhm.
I had to set those boundaries for myself, though, first, before I could ever say to a client, no, actually, that's an unreasonable expectation. This was the guideline that was set out in our initial contract. This is when you'll hear from me.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
for me, and I think for a lot of solopreneurs, it's that 24-hour instant communication feedback. If I haven't heard from my SaaS in less than 24 hours, I'm going to go get a different one.
Right. Right.
And I do not think these expectations are reasonable in a space where almost nothing is urgent.
Right. 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 The reasonability factor, boy, I could talk on that all day long. But I think that setting the expectations is so key, setting them for ourselves and then setting them for other people, because a lot of people say, like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs worry, like, well, if I don't get back to them quickly, like, what if, right? But if the expectation is that you won't get back to them for, 3 business days, you don't really have to think about the what if anymore. That's just the expectation. So if a day goes by, you still got 2 more.
Right. And again, we are finding the culture as it exists in our own lives and business, figuring out the ways in which it is personally harmful, and then creating new norms.
That's right. Create new norms,
Or creating the rules, as Marisa would say. We get to
if you
we get to
will.
pick our own. So,
Right.
how do you find that it works to codify this. Like, I actually have this stuff written down. It's in Notion. It all lives in a document. Like my boundaries, my guidelines. I have put a great deal of thought into creating documentation around this. Do you have any recommendations for people who are building this for themselves?
Start the document. Could be a Word doc, could be Notion. Like if you're starting from scratch on this, you got to open up that document and start brainstorming. It doesn't have to be full sentences to start with. It can just be, phrases, ideas. But start with a brainstorming exercise of how do I want my business to look? What sort of timing expectation do I want my clients to have, right? You choose any facet of what your business is and start ideating on it so that way you can get to the bottom of what it is that you are identifying that you want to enact. The intentionality makes a huge difference. You can't have that intentionality without putting in the effort to get there.
And I come back to removing the emotion from it. For me, what it's always been is that there will be a thing that I feel a type of way about. And I
Mhm.
don't know why I feel that type of way about it, but I really have found that if I sit with it, there's always something inherently destructive around whatever that thing is or why I feel that it has to be this way. And if I can create new structures, then I've removed my emotion about it. I've removed those negative feelings. And now it's just this neutral thing that exists
Mm.
that allows me to feel okay about it, as opposed, positive emotions in your business are great and they aren't going to be the thing that sustains you. So for me, it's been about finding the things that I hate and getting rid of them.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep. Absolutely. I think along with that, like, do the inner work, do the gut check, examine it from some different angles, but it's good to use community for that aspect too.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be like a informal poll of your 200 closest friends. It has to be, one or two trusted people who are on the journey with you in some capacity, who you can practice saying some of these things out loud to also. Because I'm like this. I mean, I can ideate all day long in my head. And sometimes I really can't get to the bottom line of what it is that's bothering me about something until I say it out loud to somebody. And it's not even about what they say back to me. It's just the process of saying it out loud to someone who's listening and hearing, really hearing what it is that I'm saying. And so I think it's important to get to know your own process for you develop, how you develop. That's the end of the sentence. Get to know your own process about how you develop, and then work that process. If it's journaling, journal. If it's writing in Notion, write in Notion. If it's talking with a trusted friend, talk with a trusted friend. Whatever it is that is your process, do that.
Okay. So I want to wrap with then, what does a small business or solopreneur look like when it's fixed? What does a healthy business look like? What's the end point here?
Boy, that's such a beautiful question. I want to hear your answer too. I think that a fixed solopreneur business looks like a business that is thriving and supporting the solopreneur and adding to their life, not just providing for them, but adding to their life in some tangible way. When you look at the totality of moving through the world as a person, as a business owner, as whatever piece of identity feels important to you, that being at the helm of that business has added to your life.
Yeah, I think it's about having clarity about what the thing is and always where it's going, at least in the broad strokes. That a healthy business is one that you can. I often refer to businesses as like pets, right? They're separate from you. It's its own entity. And you know it's healthy when you can take it to a vet and get a health check. And your business is the same when you can sell it, when you can replace yourself, when you can take time off. So when your business is a healthy entity,
Mm,
you will be able to see it in the coat, right? It's nice and shiny. It's visible that this is a strong, healthy entity.
right. Right. I like that. I like that. And I think that sort of inherent to all of those things you listed for a healthy business, it's almost a sense of self-sustaining about it,
Yes.
right? It could be sold, it could be out there in the world belonging to someone else and it would be fine. You could be away from it for an extended period of time and it would be fine.
Yeah, I don't want to liken it to raising a child, but there is a little bit of that to it. That you
Mhm.
spend 18 to 25 to 30 years creating this adult person, and then
Right.
you send them out into the world, and your business is, it's not going to take that long, fingers crossed. But it's got the same kind of feel to it. You're making something that can go out into the world and be an autonomous thing separate from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that takes real work, y'all. But that's how we fix work, is by defining the ways that work works for us.
That's right.
Okay. So next time, mid-size businesses, is that
Yeah.
what we're looking at?
We could work our way up. Let's keep
Okay.
working our way up.
Y'all, thank you so much for being here. This has been absolutely amazing. Joa, truly, like, I'm going to be so sorry when this series is over because getting to hang out with you is just so much fun. And folks, if you are looking to create your own workshop style masterclass, you should reach out and let me know. That's briarharvey.com/partners. We are booking right now for June and July. So get yourself in before it gets out of comfortable ranges. Yes, I'm very excited about what we're doing over here. Thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time for Fixing the Midsize Business. Have an amazing day.